Every couple of weeks, someone tries to rehabilitate the image of Vince McMahon. And guys, I've got to tell you, you need to stop flogging that one. You've taken it too far. You've done too much damage. There is suddenly this hatred of everything Triple H is doing. Even if that is something worthy of pursuit, and there are arguments to be made, Vince McMahon is not the answer. I need to go over this because so many people have already forgotten about Vince McMahon. The legacy he left of really questionable choices, really quite insane allegations, and plenty of stuff that's been accurately proven already. Vince McMahon should never return to wrestling. Let's talk about it. So we all know who Vince McMahon is, so I'm not going to do an introduction. He's the guy who made WWE. Kind of. He's the guy who bought WWF, took a W out of it, then threw all his money at WrestleMania and decided, hey, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. He's a man who took a risk, basically. And risk-taking has always been synonymous with Vince McMahon in every possible way. The man has an ego. You don't get to that level of success without an ego, but also he's very close to known rich people, such as Donald Trump. I'm surprised we haven't seen any sort of Vince McMahon and Elon Musk work together, but even Elon Musk, insanity verbose, seems not to want to touch this guy. WrestleMania 1, with celebrities with that mainstream appeal, launched the territorial collapse. Before Vince McMahon, every area in America and all across the world had its own version of professional wrestling. And Vince McMahon said, hey, I'm going to get a TV deal and we're going to forget all about that. It's just going to be me. The original Monopoly man years before it was cool. We're talking like 40 plus years ago. Vince McMahon said, hey, I'm going to just throw money at this and take a risk. And that risk succeeded. There are arguments to be made that while, yes, he changed wrestling forever in a way that would define it, and he absolutely did, it also may have changed in spite of him. Because a lot of this was also down to big names. You had Hulk Hogan, also not necessarily a well-recognised good guy, particularly with his time in WCW, but undoubtedly a trendsetter and a changer of the world of wrestling at the time. You also had other mainstream names. Ted DiBiase should be celebrated more for the work that he did as the perfect antithesis of Hulk Hogan. You have to say Mr. T, who took a risk himself to get involved with the WWE at that time. Rowdy Roddy Piper, the heel to end all heels. Andre the Giant from WrestleMania 3. And then as we get closer to now, you see Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 12. You see The Undertaker and The Streak. You see the John Cenas, the Steve Austins, the Roman Reigns, who dominated the sphere. Not all of that can be granted to Vince McMahon, but a hell of a lot of it can be. The man knew talent when he saw it. The Rock, as Rocky Maivia, was incredibly forgettable, but he became The Rock. Chris Jericho came this close to being fired on multiple occasions by Vince McMahon. But it's Vince McMahon who poached him from WCW in the first place. The man could definitely recognize talent. That is also part of his downfall. Vince McMahon loved other people's toys. He loved making people into toys regardless. Vince McMahon, in my mind, is essentially the overlord puppet master, except he's not pulling the strings, he's playing with toy wrestlers, except his is global scale. This is Vince McMahon. Now, where he goes from there, that becomes a very different environment. We can celebrate what he created. We can celebrate what he started. But I have to ask, do you celebrate his entire legacy? Or do you choose to celebrate the parts that you are comfortable talking about? I want to make a case against him ever coming back to wrestling. Because in my mind, there is no advantage of him ever even being involved. First and foremost, we have to talk at least to some degree, and I'll be very careful here, you know how I work, about allegations of misconduct. There is an ongoing trial in which Vince McMahon is accused of several different things. Human trafficking is one of the things he's been accused of. Essentially trying to sell a woman to a wrestler, that wrestler being Brock Lesnar, by the way, according to the New York Times, sell a woman to a wrestler to try and convince that wrestler to sign a new contract. Makes me wonder what they did to convince Brock Lesnar to come back recently. How often can you sell a woman? Apparently infinitely, especially if, you don't respect a woman as an individual, as a person. Vince McMahon also has said racial slurs live on TV. He also is credited with the development of a storyline in which he got his daughter pregnant. This is Vince McMahon. This is a guy who likes to play out his concepts on TV, who tried to get his daughter into a dark wedding. But it's okay, she was rescued by Stone Cold Steve Austin. Still a big fan of Vince McMahon, by the way. Also, amongst those accusations, defecating on a woman's face. To be clear, when she didn't want that. Don't want to yuck anyone's yum, but Jesus Christ. He also is guilty of a hostile takeover in order to sell the company and make himself millions upon billions of pounds, dollars I should say. That hostile takeover, after it was unanimously voted by the WWE board that he should not return, including a vote by Triple H and Stephanie McMahon, the daughter being mentioned, he was able to force it because he still had the level of stock buyout that he had. There has also been investigations into him using WWE funding to pay people off. Some of that money went missing and ended up being discovered as part of the Trump campaign. It was given to Donald Trump around the time of the Battle of the Billionaires. This man's connected. Those are just some of the ethical standpoints. I do suggest maybe we have a check of Ashley Mazzaro. There's something worth Googling and trying to find out what happened there, because there is plenty about Vince McMahon that isn't necessarily in the public eye. But everyone's willing to forgive now, apparently. Let's just talk storyline-wise. WWE under Vince McMahon was horrible. Was terrible. Some of the creative options he chose were ridiculous. Some of the storylines he made were offensive. Do you remember Mae Young giving birth to a hand? That's a while back, but then you go through a very negative era when, John Cena was Superman and destroying the Nexus, when Brock Lesnar was ending the streak. You look at how he used to develop characters and how at times he used to get offended by those characters when they would find their own way to get over. Bad News Barrett, still with the company, found a way to get over, seemingly punished for it. Under Triple H, we have long-term storytelling. We're not going back and forth and losing our minds constantly. There is more focus on wrestling. The actual characters are strong. We're actually seeing the development of people that we didn't necessarily think would be considered main event stars. We were this close to getting Gunter in a foreign heel versus USA storyline. And you want that back? Under Vince McMahon, my immediate question was, would there be a Wyatt 6? He was a big supporter of Bray Wyatt, but I don't feel he really gave him the chance to shine. A lot of wrestlers are outright much happier Vince McMahon is gone. Mostly the newer generation. The older generation are typically still the flag-bearing Republicans, and people like John Cena will still turn up wherever Vince McMahon tells him to. AJ Styles as well, surprisingly big on the Vince McMahon train, but we are where we are of that one. Randy Orton, big on Vince McMahon. A lot of people real big on Vince, but they're all the ones who are going to be retiring soon. So the future is not Vince McMahon. Also, primarily, he's getting a bit older, guys. If you bring him back now, will he ever retire? Will he just die in the chair? That was always going to be how it goes down, isn't it? Anyway, under Triple H, things are different. PLEs are shorter, but we get longer wrestling matches. More people get opportunities. Less recognizable names are constantly involved in big decisions. Jey Uso won a Royal Rumble. There are potential drawbacks depending on how you like to consume your wrestling. There's a lot less of those big Royal Rumble surprises that Vince McMahon was very fond of. He loved to build a WrestleMania moment, whereas Triple H likes to build a great story. The Bloodline storyline was very well received, and that was Vince McMahon and ChatGPT. So there's a lot at play there. There are arguments for more involvement of Vince McMahon. I just don't feel for a second that they outweigh the negatives that he would bring, the reputational damage that he's already caused, the damage that he's potentially caused to lives if these accusations are proven to be correct. I also feel that 20 years ago the man was left behind. We've got people now saying we need Vince back, we need Vince back. The same people 20 years ago were saying he's past it, he doesn't know what he's doing, get rid. We are in a TKO world now, which involves cutting costs, making money, and being crowd pleasing. The PG era was not a strength for Vince McMahon. It wasn't. The last good thing I can honestly say that Vince McMahon did was pop up during the pandemic in a Money in the Bank match where, well, in 2 Money in the Bank matches, technically, when he was just arguing with Daniel Bryan and AJ Styles. And someone else probably wrote that, let's be fair. Vince's approach to wrestling no longer fits. If he throws all the money in the company at next year's WrestleMania, you got a multi-billion-dollar WrestleMania. And if it's next year's WrestleMania, it's in Saudi Arabia anyway. So it's a multi-billion-dollar WrestleMania. Honestly, it's bad enough that he gave us the Saudi Arabia deal. There are so many people in that locker room who are uncomfortable enough knowing that Brock Lesnar is back. If Vince McMahon came back, hell to pay. The man is still actively under investigations and lawsuits. There is still problems as regards driving and whether he's allowed to. There are investigations ongoing that also implicate the WWE. A lot is made of the investigation into Vince McMahon, but they're not just into Vince McMahon. They're also into the WWE. Accusations heavily against the culture there, against John Laurinaitis when he was working there, against the entire talent relations department. People who haven't left, who have not left, are still under investigation there. The usual counterpoints really don't fit here. We'll go through them because, my God, they're all very similar. You will always hear the argument, WWE is his baby. He made it. So what's going to happen when he's no longer with us? Are you saying that the WWE cannot survive without him? Because it's done pretty well in the last few years. If he has an entitlement to the company that he built, why would he sell it? He didn't want to be there. He hopefully knew better. I know that if he came into the ring, you'd have the crowd still singing his song. That's a slight on the crowd, not a positive to Vince McMahon. There are also arguments that, hey, he knows business. The WWE was more successful under him than anyone else. Not true. Not true at all. Nick Khan as CFO has given us a much more profitable WWE than ever before. Under Triple H, the WWE is the most successful it has ever been. The Vince McMahon numbers don't even come close. Other arguments that he would just simply sit in the background, give advice, talk about storylines. Vince McMahon does not sit quietly in the background. That's not who he is. That's not his style. Vince McMahon walks into the room and tells you how things are. He tells you how it's going to be. He led a hostile takeover into the WWE. This man will never go quietly into the night. Going forwards, WWE is focusing on women that would never have had a chance under Vince McMahon, on men who would never have had a chance under Vince McMahon. Gunther came this close to going. Wrestlers who've come back, Rusev quite recently, Aleister Black, Cody Rhodes, thriving without Vince McMahon. Dominic Mysterio, the future of WWE. Vince McMahon has never been anywhere near his storylines. We need to let Vince McMahon go. We need to give people like Becky Lynch an opportunity to write for the women without having Vince come in and rewrite everything. The wrestling industry has got such strong competition for WWE now. AEW is still in a great place. TNA, while admittedly under the WWE umbrella, is still putting up a fight. You've got indies like Rev Pro, like Eve Wrestling. You've got so many different areas in which wrestling is thriving. And the man who apparently built it, who took over all the territories, funny how territories start coming back once he's no longer eating the entire pie. It's not the sort of pie I want him involved in. This is a world in which AAA and WWE are working together. In which TNA and WWE are working together. This is a world in which the WWE is a market leader without being a market owner. Yes, he gave us the WWE. Yes, he can piss off and leave us with a better one. That's not a hot take. I know it's not. Vince McMahon is one of those people that does divide opinion. A lot of people will have their opinions, and so they should. I'm not going to agree with most of them. I'm not going to agree with some of them. I'm going to have my opinions, and that's how it's going to play out. This is just my opinion on this here podcast. But the world of wrestling is a better place and a more entertaining place with Vince McMahon far, far away. I ask you the question, would CM Punk have returned under Vince McMahon? I don't think he would. Would someone like Julia be getting an opportunity under Vince McMahon? This is a guy who did the voiceovers for Kai and Tai. This is a guy who, what he did to Asuka, it's just, this is a guy who, if you can't necessarily win over the crowd in the first couple of matches, you become a joke. You become comic relief. You're never taken seriously again. Look at what happened to Zack Ryder. This is a man whose time was great and whose time is done. Much like John Cena, his time is no longer. It is time to walk away. There's a few more things I want to discuss here on this podcast. We want to talk about a little bit of news. We want to talk about the wrestling receipt. We want to talk about plans for the channel and the like. But leave your opinions in the comments before we get to that about Vince McMahon. Would you have him back? Do you have a different opinion to me? Do you support my opinion? What do you think? Debate, chat, I'll be in those comments. Let me know what you think. I'm going to start then with a bit of news. I just need to pull a notepad out because I had some notes and they were all in writing. Firstly, while watching SmackDown and also playing Football Manager at the same time, I can multitask. I made a number of notes and then reached out to a number of people to see what was going on. I can confirm, and I've mentioned this previously, Charlotte Flair and Alexa Bliss are currently intentionally working with Nia Jax to try and rehabilitate her, to repair her image a little bit. And I do feel, unfortunately, she kind of needs it. She's had a bit of bad luck. She's had a few sloppy moments. We've also got a pause between the Wyatt Six and the MFT because Bo Dallas is off dealing with some family situations. Bo Dallas hasn't been in WWE for a while. He hasn't been at shows because his family have needed him. We are getting the MFT versus the Wyatt Six. The crowds are hot for it. It might be the hottest they've been for Solo Sikoa since we learned about his singing voice. But we need to be patient here. Bo needs the time. And I do feel that there's plenty they can do with the Wyatt Six in the meantime. They're in the tag division for a reason. Bo Dallas doesn't need to be there for them to compete. They've still got Eric Rowan. They've still got Nikki Cross. We could have a Nikki Cross and Alexa Bliss feud. We could have a Nikki Cross versus anyone feud. Give me a Nikki Cross versus Jade Cargill feud. That'd be baffling in every way. The WWE are looking at Dragunov, who's just returned to WWE, as a brand new signing. It's one of those situations whereby he wasn't in WWE too long before he claimed the United States Championship, because if you factor out the injury, he wasn't main roster very long at all. He's had great matches with Gunter. That moment is undoubtedly coming again, and I do feel that'll be World Championship material when it does happen. But for now, the US Open is reintroducing him to the crowd. Ron Killings. Do you remember how we were told for months that R-Truth was now Ron Killings? Yeah, that hasn't really happened. In fact, if anything, R-Truth is just back to being R-Truth. And that's all we've really got. WWE not particularly happy with the work of Julia. They don't feel that she's learning English quickly enough, which is one of the reasons that they've pivoted back to Chelsea Green with the Women's United States Championship. Chelsea Green is considered bankable, she's considered safe, and she's considered the ideal mid-card champion. Also, I've got to say, the guy who took a selfie with Chelsea Green's bottom, you're a dickhead. Sue me. So, that leaves us then with the wrestling receipt. What I tend to do for these, I'm going to look back using the wonderful resource of Cage Side Seats, and we're going to look back at some of the older rumours that they covered. Now, Cage Side Seats works very hard to fact check all of their sources. However, while they fact check as much as possible and don't publish news from people who regularly get things wrong, their accuracy since starting the look back is 58.5%. Just under 6 in 10. So there's no arguing the fact they get a lot of stuff wrong. Because a lot of the big names in wrestling journalism get stuff wrong. It's very common. It's very normal. And we shouldn't be ashamed of it. May 2nd, 2025, WrestleVotes Radio indicates the WWE draft will still happen this year, but the usual timing has been thrown off due to a quick succession of PLEs and Saturday night main event shows. Hasn't happened. No draft as of yet. None whatsoever. WrestleVotes mentioned that Tama Tonga's injury is worse than anticipated and could end up delaying Tonga Loa's return as well. Tama Tonga returned in June. They brought Tonga Loa back before, so that didn't happen. 0-2 so far for WrestleVotes. Wrestling Observer. Brian Alvarez is under the impression Liv Morgan is heading over to Japan this week as she prepares to begin shooting for the movie Bad Lieutenant Tokyo. Multiple outlets claim that Liv and Raquel Rodriguez will not be stripped of the tag team championships while she's away filming, which is absolutely correct. We also point out when they get them right because you got to celebrate this. WrestleVotes also got one right. Jeff Cobb's name being brought up in WWE creative discussions and his debut appears to be imminent per WrestleVotes. Looks like he'll skip NXT and go right to the main roster. Both of those things absolutely happened. Sean Ross Sapp did not think Braun Strowman would end up in AEW. He didn't. He's not under WWE contract, but he is working to get himself back to the WWE. Braun Strowman's intention, essentially, is to make himself so big a name via his TV work that the WWE can't ignore him and have to beg him to come back. What I will say, good luck. Wrestling Observer, who did so well earlier. Wrestling Observer's Dave Meltzer thinks WWE is saving a tag team match of Roman Reigns and CM Punk versus Seth Rollins and Braun Breaker for Money in the Bank or SummerSlam. Neither of these things happened. Instead, at SummerSlam, we got the cash-in when Seth Rollins was injured. Multiple outlets, I always love it when they say this, because you're not actually sourcing it. Multiple outlets point out that WWE is no longer advertising Cody Rhodes for any events until the May 16th edition of SmackDown. So it looks like that is when he will return to television. He returns shortly afterwards, and the Saturday night main event on May 24th, so 8 days later. Cage Side Seats have got this as wrong. I would possibly put this as right, but I can't give anyone credit because you've just put multiple outlets. So there's no source there. On Wrestling Observer Live, Brian Alvarez said he was told, at least unofficially, Damage Control is done with WWE. Which could mean Asuka and Kairi Sane works their tag team when they're back. and Io Sky continues on with her big singles push, accurate in every possible manner. Super Lucha's editor-in-chief Ernesto Ocampo posted a list of AAA wrestlers who he said had already signed WWE contracts: Alberto El Patron, or Del Rio, Hijo de Dr. Wagner, Hijo de Vikingo, La Parca, La Hydra, Lady Flama, Lady Maravilla, and Nino Hamburguesa. Nino Hamburguesa. Some of those is my first time reading them, just to be clear. I think I did okay. None of this was true. Alberto Del Rio is not signed to a WWE contract. There is very little interest in him signing to a WWE contract. After some pushback and specifically a negative reaction to the former Del Rio's name appearing on the list, Ocampo specified the new WWE contracts were necessary because AAA didn't cover everything WWE does, and that the people signed are not expected to take part in events in the United States. Some may appear in crossovers of NXT, but only a few. Didn't happen. According to Peter Insider, Dutch and Vincent of The Righteous are no longer with AEW, and the departures took place about a week ago. They are only now coming back to regular wrestling. There is lots of talk about The Righteous potentially coming to the WWE, but also there was a hell of a lot of talk of Dutch and Vincent being part of the Wyatt Six, and they weren't. They just weren't. So this is one of those amazing ones where you're hearing it non-stop, and it just never happens. Per Wrestling Observer, Joe Hendry and the Hardy Boys are expected to be announced for Triple Mania. Joe Hendry worked the show, but the Hardys did not. In fact, at the time, Joe Hendry was available to be used. The Hardys were not. Fightful says Juice Robinson is close to returning for AEW. He's been healthy for almost a month and just waiting to be cleared. That was accurate. And Kenta is set to work MLW Summer of Beast this June, says PW Insider. He unsuccessfully challenged Riddle for the title. We're not calling him Matt Riddle anymore. He's just Riddle once again. I want to take a moment here to thank everyone who's watched the podcast so far. Not necessarily just this one, but the podcast in general. Numbers are doing pretty good, and honestly, I'm enjoying it. I'm not necessarily known for long-form content, even though some of my videos are definitely longer than others. These are shows where I have a rough script and I tend to just talk, which means I get a little bit ranty. But people are watching, people are engaged, and during the live shows on Fridays, people are telling me that these are good, that these are working for people. Now, if that's not the case, let me know in the comments. I'll see what I can do differently. But if that is the case, let me know as well. We have made some changes to how the channel works. We've had to. I very much enjoy making this sort of content. I very much enjoy making content for you. But the reality is, my podcast so far, after 4 installments, has still made me less than $10. And that's with about 9 hours of work. This is the reality of YouTube now. YouTube is not where it was. I look at channels like Eurogamer that were historically very successful and got a lot of views. They're struggling now to get more views than I get. YouTube is a hell of a lot more competitive now. It just is. I always modelled the way I do things on the way Smosh do things, one of the biggest names in YouTube, except they're really not anymore. They're not necessarily shrinking, but YouTube now is a very different world. The podcast is doing good things for me. It's doing good things for the numbers. But it's also a foray into a different type of content because I'm trying to work out, what does YouTube like now? I'm no longer a small channel, so I'm not getting advertised like a small channel. I'm also far from being a big channel, so I'm not getting thrown out there like a big channel. The content I make, historically, is very short term. It's news that's happening now, and it's very live show based, which isn't the meta anymore. YouTube doesn't like live shows anymore. It's not pushing them. You know what YouTube likes right now? You know what the meta is? Shorts. Shorts. If I get 1 million views on a short, I'll make 6 cents. They don't make money. They make nothing. Now, a large part of the reason why the channel has sort of exploded in the last couple of years is that I did foray into shorts. I did spend a lot of time working on them. it is something I can potentially revisit, but I'm looking at potentially clipping out some of these podcasts. So the podcast is not just for this content, it's for future content. Going away from social media was one of the best things for my mental health, one of the worst things for advertising the channel, but there are platforms that I can still use, TikTok, Instagram. There are ways to continue growing, because now, be sure you follow the Discord, now we are in an environment where getting people to watch and click on a YouTube link is less valuable than getting someone to click on a Discord link, on an Instagram link, on an external link. YouTube has changed, not necessarily for the better. Subscriptions no longer mean anything. It is all about creating a channel where everybody who watches it watches all of it. And that simply isn't possible. People have lives. As such, any dream that I have to go full time kind of has to see itself out at the door. But that's okay. The important thing is that I'm enjoying this. And if you are as well, you'll be seeing plenty more of me. For now though, I've been Tom Collier. You've been fantastic, and I'll see you all very soon.